on Focus Gaming News today, we're very pleased to welcome Paul Newson, who's the president of the International Association of Gaming Regulators. Paul, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Joe. Look, it's great to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you this morning.
Perhaps just to begin, for those people who are not familiar with the IAGR's role, if you tell us a little bit about how it developed and its role now, because it's been a decade now that it's been established as an independent body, bringing together representatives from regulators really all over the world.
Absolutely, and that's really its mandate. It is the association that brings together the regulatory bodies, the gambling regulatory bodies globally, and the association's mission is to advance efficient and effective gambling regulation internationally. So, look, we approach that with some gusto, with some ambition. I think we've achieved much, but look, I think there's much more work for us to do and much more that we can achieve.
Mm-hmm. Operators often complain that regulation and the huge range of regulations across different territories is a challenge, and there's bodies like the EGBA in Europe now are pushing for more cross-border codes to try to ensure kind of similar standards for players in different territories. Do you think there's space for more harmony in regulation across territories?
Look, I think as the footprint of operators and the issues become globalized, this conversation is pivotal. This conversation is really, really important. One of the tensions, one of the difficulties that arises in this space is that many regulators, not all, but many regulators are state-based or province-based. And so that throws up this complex web of different approaches and inconsistencies. And sometimes there's not that appetite or perhaps that motivation to drive harmonization, at least internationally. So look, I think this is a very important topic, and I think there's much room. There is ample room to make more headway in this space. I have a lot of sympathy for operators that have national as well as global footprints. They have to navigate this complex web of often inconsistent requirements and obligations, and then they have to invest not insignificant effort to maintain that consistent approach and ensure that they are within the obligations within each province or within each state. So look, in short, I think there is ample opportunity to make headway here. I think it probably hasn't received the attention and the priority that it ought. It is a massive and unnecessary regulatory burden on industry, but equivalently, it's inefficiency and friction for regulators. We would be much better positioned to be able to have a common standard and a common conversation around how we are pursuing that, and then leverage those efficiencies to advance more effective regulation. So look, I think this should get more attention, and it's something that I think the International Association of Gaming Regulators can really drive.
Mm. Do you think there is an appetite for it among regulators? Because on the one hand, we see agreements, we see conversations between regulators, obviously looking at what each other are doing and sharing best practice. But on the other hand, there's almost we see more division as well of different territories introducing quite disparate kind of very particular rules that mean operators having to adapt products specifically for different markets.
Look, I think that is one of the key challenges, one of the key constraints. And being practical, each jurisdiction will be at a different point of maturity in its regulatory framework, and will have different priorities. So we do need to acknowledge that. Different jurisdictions will have different priorities, but it doesn't remove the obvious opportunity to get greater commonality and greater harmony. I think it does need a spark, though. I think it does need somebody to drive it, because you have all of these different, often province-based or state-based regulators. You need somebody to galvanize that and really give it momentum, because absent that, there's often not. In all the regulators have very busy agendas. They're leading often contentious public policy discussions or driving reform. It's just not space on the calendar to engage in another piece of work that isn't being put as a priority for them. So, look, I think there's ample opportunity. It just needs an organisation to drive it, to spark it, and perhaps more voice from different stakeholders to agitate around it and to promote the efficiency and the advantage. Both, look, absolutely there'll be commercial advantage. It'll get rid of burdensome red tape, unnecessary red tape, but there's also regulatory advantage there. Regulatory efficiency, where there's friction and wastage in that regulatory effort, we can apply that elsewhere. We can apply that to better dividend and where the risks are higher, where we really should be looking with our gaze.
Mm. You mentioned there listening to the voices of different stakeholders. What voice do you think operators themselves should have when it comes to regulation? And do you think that the regulators are taking on board now the voices of operators?
Yes, look, I think we're at a juncture there, and look, it does depend on what jurisdiction perhaps you're based in, or where the public policy discussions are occurring. But in some and perhaps many jurisdictions, there's an increasingly activist voice which is trying to move a prohibition discussion. And look, and I find that uneasy. I find it uneasy because it's trying to oust, it's trying to exclude voices from that conversation. My view is everybody has an opportunity to contribute to a public policy discussion. Everybody should have a voice. That's operators, that's industry participants, that's industry stakeholders, it's public policy professionals. Everybody should have a voice and a contribution to that conversation. It's in the public square. I think it's negligent, it's reckless not to. On one view, how can you possibly make good public policy if you're not listening to industry and industry stakeholders? Don't misinterpret me. I'm not saying you have to adhere to everything industry wants, by no means. Just the same as you don't have to adhere to completely what any stakeholder wants, but you really do need to listen and you need to understand, because how else do you grapple with the complexity? How else do you then divine what is an appropriate, balanced public policy position and what is going to be an evidence-informed regulatory posture and regulatory approach? So, look, I get uneasy when there's voices, and often there's somewhat radical voices that want to exclude people from conversations. I think we need to have a broad church. I think we need to be listening to everybody. And then we need to be judiciously weighing those arguments and deciding what is in the best interests of sustainable industry, what is in the best interests of safer gambling, and what allows some competition and some innovation, and ultimately meets what are ever-evolving community expectations.
Is there anything that you think operators could do to improve the way they communicate, to improve the way they get their message across to regulators and to legislators as well?
Look, absolutely. Not resiling from the conversation, I think, is one, and contributing to that conversation in a measured and a balanced way. I think everybody has to acknowledge that in the past there have been failures. Have there been opportunities where stakeholders could have done more, industry could have done more, or an individual operator could have done more? I think absolutely that's the case. I don't think you want to argue the toss on that. I think it's looking to the future, looking to where there are opportunities to genuinely strive to achieve a safer gambling environment, one that balances these obvious commercial tensions with player safety. There are clearly competing tensions there, but one where it's deftly managed, where it's balanced appropriately. You can get sustainable, vibrant industry, and you can get safer outcomes for players. And for that cohort, a relatively small cohort that experiences problem gambling, you can put in place appropriate measures to better safeguard them. And I think there's rich opportunity with big data, and operators have invested massively in the marketing piece. I think there's tremendous opportunity to turn that investment around, the safer gambling, the inroads into safer gambling, and how can you better provide both the customer service and achieve your commercial outcomes, but also really drive safer gambling outcomes, and particularly for that vulnerable cohort. Look, it is a relatively small cohort, but it's an important cohort, and industry needs to be seen and needs to advance better outcomes for safer gambling.
Okay, good observations. When operators and developers of games often say that regulation stifles innovation in the industry, do you think that's fair? And do you think there are ways that regulation can actually boost and actually push innovation within the industry whilst providing the safeguards that are necessary?
Yeah, look, I think that's a reasonable observation by pundits, by industry commentators. Often, gambling regulatory frameworks, gambling legislation is allowed to become obsolescent, or even obsolete. It gets aged, and it is unable. It's not sufficiently nimble to keep up with new offerings, new products, new services. So you end up having these cumbersome obligations, cumbersome law that isn't nimble enough to accommodate new business models. So I think it's a reasonable observation, and I think most fair-minded people would recognise that. There's definitely opportunities to try and spark some innovation, and I've observed previously that financial services fintechs and the like do this well, and financial services regulators often do this well. The tolerance for cumbersome regulation in the financial services space has really diminished. There's an acknowledgement that this is about economic vitality. This is about giving people opportunity and competition, and wanting to introduce novel products, new products, and really bolster innovation. So I think we can take a few pages out of the FinTech book and the RegTech book. So look, one mechanism, and it's not a panacea, but one mechanism is this regulatory sandbox. It's not a new idea, it's not a new concept, and it's not a silver bullet, but what it does do, it allows you to almost work within those cumbersome, perhaps obsolescent regulatory frameworks, and you put in place this time-bounded and controlled environment where operators can test new products. They can really innovate. They can test new games. They can test new services within this controlled and scrutinized environment of a regulatory sandbox. And it doesn't have the cumbersome liability of all the necessary approvals and the investment around that, only to get a red light at the end of it. You can have this quick, nimble test, fail early. If you're going to fail early. Get an understanding of how consumers respond to it in a safe, controlled environment. And look, I think it's a win-win. It allows you to, in a controlled environment, you've engaged researchers often to help with this evaluation, get early feedback, allow industry to innovate. And this innovation just doesn't have to be commercial. It can also be around safer gambling. So look, I think there's enormous lessons we can pull in from financial services and financial services regulation, and a regulatory sandbox is one of them. I think there should be more of them. They don't have to be comprehensive and tortuously riddled with policy. I think minimum viable product, get something up, get some momentum behind it, and try and spark some innovation and spark some novel products out there and evaluate them in a safe way.
Excellent. VIP schemes have come in for quite a bashing recently. The British Gambling Commission just announced new measures this week, whilst holding off from a complete ban for now, at least. What's your take on how regulators are approaching operators' use of schemes for high-value customers?
Yeah, look, I think it really is a contemporary and quite a contentious topic at the moment. As you say, the UK Gambling Commission is looking at this very closely, and I understand the House of Lords over there and the Parliament is also observing this, and there's some division around. There are some actors that are calling for a complete prohibition. There are other voices, perhaps these are more measured voices that are looking at, look, where are the failures, where are the gaps? And are we effectively managing this commercial tension against this player safety? Have we got that balance right? I'd be the first one to observe that in the past, and perhaps even now, that balance isn't right. It's not right everywhere. Sometimes, and it's with those outlier operators, hopefully, that have that misaligned. That they might have incentives for the people misaligned, so that they're currently rewarded for cultivating more problem gambling behaviour, which doesn't serve the industry and doesn't serve individual customers or ultimately that operator in the short to long term. It really doesn't. So, look, my view on this is that every commercial enterprise needs to be able to recognise their consumers, their players, their in this instance the gamblers that have the capacity and that can afford to spend more money. There's a reasonable expectation that they want a different level of service. And I think, like every other industry, gambling operators should be able to provide that different level of service. Where I think it does need more attention, though, is to make sure that that commercial tension and that player safety, that balance is right, because I think there have been failures there. So I think industry is now alive to this and making some inroads. But I think there is more work to do in this space. I think this is getting now government and political attention. And if industry doesn't act with some momentum to calibrate that tension better, look, there'll be blunt intervention. And I would never be one calling for a prohibition, but often the politics get in front of everything when there is inaction from industry. So look, I'm hopeful that there will be an industry voice and momentum around this. We're not just talking the UK, this is now globally. There's certainly been issues and failures in Australia around this. So I'm hoping there'll be momentum and industry will come with really material, really cogent suggestions how they can better safeguard vulnerable players, while still allowing to recognise that that players that can afford it should be able to be recognised and get a different tier of service. For me, it really comes down to affordability. You need to make sure that your player has the means and that can afford to be making the spend that they are. And this has a very particular nexus with anti-money laundering as well. Nobody wants, as much as it's aberrant, nobody wants players in their scheme that are obtaining their funds by improper or unlawful means, or attempting to use an operator to launder those funds. That is in nobody's interest. It's not in the public interest. So look, that really needs to be cracked down on. And so there's a strong nexus with your anti-money laundering regime. So that needs to be hardened. But put simply, there is a tension between commercial and player safety. That balance is probably not quite right yet. And the incentives for staff and how the operator aligns those incentives needs to be balanced, needs to be measured, and there shouldn't be incentives for people to cultivate problem gambling. That's in nobody's interests. So look, I think it needs a measured, balanced approach, but there's more work to do.
Excellent, great. Well, just to finish before we round up, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Regulating the Game program that you have planned to take place in Sydney next year?
Oh, look, tremendous. Yeah, look, thanks for the opportunity. We're partnering with the International Centre for Gaming Regulation at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and we're very excited about it. The course was run in 2019 in Sydney and was attended by around 60 to 70 regulators from global jurisdictions. So we're excited to be running it in 2021. We're bringing out the faculty from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, the International Centre for Gaming Regulation, and it really is, there's no other offering like this, certainly not in the Southern Hemisphere. So it's a prestigious course. It's a 5-day course where both regulators and industry participants will be able to hear from internationally leading faculty around gambling law, regulation, behavioural insights, responsible gambling, and really build their individual capability and go back to their operator or go back to the regulator and start to make a really significant uplifted contribution to that regulatory effort. And also have this better capability to be able to manage those tensions between the commercial offer and the regulatory obligations. So look, I can't applaud this effort more. It's a tremendous initiative with UNLV, and we're really looking forward to running the course in 2021. And we hope to see you there.
Excellent. It sounds like a good program. It really does.
Look, we're very excited, and we're so appreciative to be able to open it up to industry in 2021. We had a lot of demand in 2019, but we decided to keep it just for regulators. But now we think it's appropriate to bring industry into the discussion, and who better to help industry best position their regulatory thinking and their contribution to public policy discussions than the expert faculty from UNLV. And now Senate, the organisation that I work for, will be contributing to that course as well. So look, we're thrilled and we're very excited.
Excellent. Well, Paul Newson, President of the IAGR, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you here from Australia, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Thanks, Joe. It's been a tremendous conversation, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you.
Okay, thanks for your time, Paul. Thank you.